Hello, friends, and welcome to a new week on the DaveCast. It's November 17th as we continue in James, where we've gotten to chapter 5. Woohoo! So my goal this week is for us to finish the letter of James, which I think should be very doable. Before I read the verses, though, let me remind you that really the overall theme of James is authenticated faith. Early on in the letter, James says, "Look, show me your faith without deeds. I'll show you my faith by my deeds." And he's talking to a group of Jewish Christians who are dispersed abroad, dealing with the issues that were true in his day, and if we're honest, it's true in our day, where we might have all the right beliefs, we might have all the right words, we might really speak good Christianese, but far too often our actions aren't so good. James is all about orthopraxy, to use that big $10 theological word. There's orthodoxy, which would be having and believing in sound doctrine and theology, and orthopraxy, and that's living that out in real life. And the truth is, lots of times our lifestyles don't reflect the holiness that God has called us to do. And so we continually see throughout this letter James' theme of authentic faith lived out in action and how we live our lives, our faith in action. Okay, so with that in mind, let's get down to chapter 5. Be forewarned, this is a rocky spot. This is a place where James is pretty rough with what he has to say about those with wealth and power. So let me read the first 3 verses of chapter 5. "Now listen, you rich people. Weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days." And so, as I said before, many of the Christians that James was writing to were living in extreme poverty. But apparently there were also some wealthy people in the church. And apparently not only did they have money, but they used the power and position that money gave them so that they would oppress the poor to increase their wealth even more. And James is very, very hard on this kind of behavior. And let me say that the Bible generally doesn't attack wealthy people for being wealthy. You know, the Bible doesn't necessarily love the idea of wealth, but generally speaking, the attacks for the wealthy are on one of 2 things. First, that they have trusted their wealth, and in doing so, they did not put their trust in God, or that they misuse their wealth for power and influence. In doing so, they have abused others. In other words, they have amassed their wealth at the expense of those who are vulnerable, and they've used their position and their influence to take advantage of others. And that seems to be the situation that James is referring to here as we move on into verse 4. He says, "Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourself in the day of slaughter." So apparently there were some of these poor Christians that had been working out in the fields of these rich Christians, and these rich Christians had not paid them, or they paid them less than what they were due. And I can tell you that the Bible has zero tolerance and zero sympathy in both the Old Testament and the New Testament for people who do this kind of thing. This kind of abuse is a significant offense to God. And this seems to be what James has in mind here, or at least a part of what James has in mind here. You might remember from the Old Testament how the community of Israel was called to leave parts of their fields so that the poor would have something to glean from. Actually, that was part of the law we studied in the book of Exodus way back when, earlier in the year. And you also, if you're familiar with some other Old Testament stories, like the story of Ruth, it addresses that. And so I think one of the practical application things we need to recognize here, that as people of faith, we are called to recognize that our circle of responsibility extends beyond what the world considers its circle. We hear Jesus teach this in many different ways, about hey, even the pagans love their family and take care of their family. But to those who follow Christ, who seek to be his disciples, we're to be looking for those beyond that circle. And Scripture is very much universal in its voice that the poor and the downtrodden and these folks, that they're within our circle of responsibility. And so he then continues in verse 6, which is going to be the last verse we look at today. And he says, you have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. And I think this is probably a reference to Jesus, because, Jesus is condemned and he is the innocent one. But I think in general, it also is a cry against anyone who harms innocent people, anyone who tries to harm those who don't deserve it. Now, I know most of us don't think of ourselves as rich, and yet we have a great number of resources. The truth is, most of us are blessed beyond our imaginations. And so the reminder is, with this incredible blessing, we've been given incredible responsibility. And so we need to ask ourselves, what do we do with what we've been given? How do we use our resources and our influence to accomplish God's will? And so I think I'll stop there for today. I do look forward to being back with you again on Thursday as we continue in our study of James. But for now, you keep bringing the hope. God bless you.